Hey, friends. Welcome to another really fun week here on the podcast. This was an episode I didn't know I was going to record. I started my day as I start all of my days, and about a quarter mile into my run, listening to my favorite podcast, a moment of inspiration came to me. So I stopped, recorded the note, I kept going, and before I knew it, the first 2 miles of my run were basically a run, stop, run, stop, run, stop situation where, as the outline for this conversation was unfolding in my brain, I needed to stop and record it. And you're wondering, I'm sure, why I couldn't have just kept it in the back of my mind and written it down when I got home. And the sad fact is I would have lost it. In fact, by the time I got to my office 3 hours later, I had to look at the notes to remember what inspiration I actually had in my head. So this is just the reality of where we are. So I thought, let's record it now before I get even farther away from the excitement and the inspiration. Let's just do the dang thing now. So this is what we are doing. Did not plan to do this today, but here we are. When you are inspired, take inspired action. That is what I will say about that. The topic today is hustle culture and the corporate bragger. Now, hustle culture is a phrase that is used all over the place by anybody in a negative light, to point out what they believe is the toxicity within inside of companies. And I will say there's lots of things that could be related to hustle that are toxic. But the narrative right now, and if you're listening to this in the future, this would probably be helpful for you to know, the narrative right now is that we need to kill hustle culture. It needs to die. There's an anti-hustle culture movement afoot, and probably rightfully so in some regards. So what I want to start with today, before we go any further, is to make sure that you're clear on what I mean when I say hustle culture and what I see kind of being discussed out there in the world. Now, hustle itself as a word does not have the best of origins. In fact, it was a pretty negative term. If you pointed to somebody and said that they were a hustler 30 or 40 years ago, it meant that they were doing whatever it took to get by, and often it was shady, maybe a little bit illegal. And then at some point, pop culture said being a hustler is cool. And there was a badge of honor if you could say that you were a hustler, if you labeled yourself as a hustler, because it meant in pop culture terms that you were throwing it all out there, that you were doing whatever it took to achieve the result that you wanted. There was some honor in being a hustler. And as time went on, this concept of hustling started to blend and merge with what is also discussed, which is being a workaholic, where the only thing that you do is work, the only thing you think about is work, where you sacrifice all other aspects of your life for the work. Being a workaholic is a negative thing. There is nobody walking around celebrating the fact that somebody that they know is a workaholic. And you'll often hear people talking about being reformed workaholics because, case in point, a holic means that you're addicted to something, that you cannot exist without it. And in this case, that's work. And so as hustle started to bleed and blend with this concept of being a workaholic, the phrase hustle culture started to pop up. And this is where things get interesting. Because hustle culture is really an environment, a community, a way of being that says hustling's cool. And everybody should be a hustler if they want to be a part of the cool kids club. And this led, if any of you are on social, which I'm sure many of you are, this led to getting to see all sorts of B-roll or behind the scenes where you were watching people grind and grind and grind and put in the work and put in the effort. And it was for all sorts of things. It was for health and fitness. It was for their business ventures. They were hustling and they were celebrating it. And so being a hero inside of hustle culture was you getting really loud and really present in people's faces that you were doing this thing better, greater, longer, harder, faster than anybody else. You were a hustler. And what the world started to do was celebrate the art of the hustle, or how we had defined it. And so if you were not bought into that, there was an implied point of view that you were lazy or less driven or not destined to greatness, which we know is nonsense. We know that those two things are not true, yet there became this dividing line. Either you were a hustler or you weren't a hard worker. There was no and in that sentence. And somewhere out there in the realm of the reality, workaholics still existed. And they also weren't a part of hustle culture because they weren't standing on the hilltop saying, look at me. My game is so strong. I am so successful. Let me show you all the things that I'm doing so that you can see how hard I'm working. The workaholic was just kind of killing themselves off into the corner. And so all of these roads led headlong into the world stopping in March of 2020. And when we reemerged from the world stopping, what emerged with it is an anti-hustle culture. What the world began to celebrate was those that were working less, those that were trying not as hard, those that were saying, I can teach you how to do it in an easier, better, simpler way. And what has now started to shift is this paradigm that hustle is bad and that you should live your life and work as an afterthought. The terms burnout are thrown around a lot. When people are talking about anti-hustle culture, people are burned out because they hustle, and therefore we need to stop hustling. We need to stop working so hard. We need to reprioritize, shift our focus on and on and on and on because hustle is bad. So the evolution of hustle that we just talked about is, 30 or 40 years ago, being a hustler was not great. You were kind of maybe doing some illegal activities. You definitely weren't a part of mainstream. And then all of a sudden, it became very popular for you to be a hustler. Celebrated, in fact. It was a badge of honor to be known as a hustler. And now in today's world, being a hustler is bad again. It's a badge of honor if you were the opposite of that. One could get whiplash if they had been working through all of these generational changes inside of a single career. Do I hustle? Do I not? Do I work like crazy? Do I not? How do I stay on the right side of what's expected of me as I go through? It's confusing. So we're going to try to unpack that a little bit here today so I can give you some guidance on how to just opt out of the conversation related to hustle and how to opt in to living the life and having the career that you desire most. So let's go back to when baby Melissa started working. Y'all know, if you've listened to a couple of these episodes, that I was a high achiever. I like to work. My human design is a manifesting generator. That generator part means I enjoy working. I like being productive. I do not like sitting still. Ironically, my middle child, same human design. And I can tell you that he likes to be industrious. I mean, this child will opt to pull weeds instead of play video games so that he can actually achieve something for the day. Off on a side note. However, it's important because my design said that you need to work. You are at your best when you are working. And so as a child, as a student, as a young career professional, that part of my design was front and center. So work was not punishment for me. And when I started my career, this concept of hustle didn't really exist, but definitely the identification of workaholic did. And it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. So if you were labeled a workaholic and you were in your 20s or the, first third of your career, that was also known as paying your dues. It was expected that we were going to work around the clock, that we were going to be the first ones in and the last ones to leave. That was the culture of the workplace when I started working. And lucky for me, my human design loved that. It lit me up. And then slowly, what I started to realize is I was being treated the same as everybody else. So while I might have been working 12 hours a day, while I might have been more productive than anybody else because I was working so much more, when it came to things like pay and performance, promotions, assignments on big opportunities, that wasn't taken into account. And what I couldn't figure out was how to show my differentiator. How could I communicate to those that were making decisions that I was a bigger value, that I was going to yield better results than my peers? Because clearly we were being assessed and selected on a different dimension. And so what that led to is what I refer to as the corporate bragger. And we all know this person. They are talking to you at some point in a meeting and they say, yep, I was working last night until 11 o'clock. It was the third day in a row. Or I haven't been to a kid's baseball game all year because I've been working on this project so hard. Or I missed my family reunion so I could stay back and I could work the weekend. We all know these people inside of our companies that at any opportunity that they have, they point out the sacrifice that they made for the good of the rest of us inside the company, or for the good of the business. And these are corporate braggers. These are people that are proving their value or believe that they're proving their value to the organization by taking any opportunity that they have and highlighting how much more dedicated, how much harder they work, how much more they give and sacrifice to the company than their peers. And so, as I have said many a time, I was unleashed into the corporate world without any onboarding about how the real world works. This is why we do this podcast. It's why we have the community. It's why I offer to work with you, because nobody tells you how this shit goes down. So I don't know. I was probably 3 years into working in a corporate office and I realized if I don't tell them that I'm working nights and weekends and long days, they're not going to know. And if they don't know because I'm not telling them, then of course they've got to assess me along the same dimensions as everybody else. So what did I do? I started telling anybody that would listen. I leave my house at 3:30 in the morning so I can go to the gym, so that I can get on the bus at 6, so that I can bust my way in and be at my desk at 7:15. And then I don't leave the office until the last bus out, which is 5:45. And if I don't make that bus, it's going to take me 2 hours to get home on the bus instead. Everybody knew my song and dance. Everybody knew that I got up, and that 3:30 was correct. I did in fact get up at 3:30 in the morning to work out. Another podcast, other topic for another day. But anyway, everybody knew that I had this crazy schedule. Everybody knew that I bridged and tunneled it into the office. And then once I moved to San Francisco, They knew that I was always the first one in and the last one out. The janitorial staff knew me because I was one that turns the lights on and I was one that turned the lights out. Everybody knew, and they knew not because they noticed my patterns, because I was in their face telling them every single day. If I stopped at a store on my way home because I worked in retail then and I got stuck there for 2 hours because I needed help with something, you bet your bottom dollar I was in there next day telling anybody that would listen that on my way home, I stopped here and then it was all of a sudden I was helping them close and on and on and on. I would tell these stories as loudly as possible. I was the corporate bragger because I had this firm belief based in nothing other than my internal point of view that if I didn't tell them, they wouldn't know. And if they wouldn't know, I wouldn't get credit for it. And if I didn't get credit for it, I wouldn't get the promotion or I wouldn't get the raise or I wouldn't get the key assignment. So every chance I had, I said something. And here's the kicker, is nobody told me how annoying it was. Nobody. This went on for years. I literally wore a cape that said, workaholic, she's amazing. Or at least she thinks she's amazing. It was insane. Looking back on it now, somebody should have told me to shut up. Somebody should have pulled me into an office somewhere and said, this is not going to help you build relationships. This is not going to help you get promoted. This is not going to win you any awards. You are not making friends with the way that you're doing this. But nobody said anything. Nobody said anything. Nobody said anything. And I continued to do it. And then, I don't know that I have the timeline exactly accurate, but I want to say we're probably at like year 5 of me working inside of a corporate environment, me being out of school, me being just an adult with a job. And a college hire, so somebody that had just graduated from college, that's how we refer to them as college hires, a college hire started. And he was a pain in the ass. I think he would even probably now admit that he was a pain in the ass, the way that I can admit that I was a pain in the ass for a long time. And he worked a lot, was very driven, now decades later is very successful. Didn't want to take advice from anybody. And he, at every chance he had, would tell anybody that would listen about how early he came in, how late he stayed, the happy hours he missed, the vacations with his family that he skipped, and on and on and on. And it drove me crazy. It drove me crazy because what it felt like is that he was trying to compete. So initially, my internal corporate bragger was like, was he trying to one-up me? Do I need to level it up? Do I need to get louder so that he knows where his place is, that he's not actually the one that's sacrificing their whole world for this place? I am. And as it continued, and he continued to drive me insane, and it would infuriate me when he would do this. One day I realized that the reason that it was so infuriating was because he was doing exactly what I had been doing for years. And what I did not like about him is what I did not like about myself. And that was a shocking moment for me. It was the first time that I had actually looked in a mirror, so to speak, and said, I do not like that reflection. And then as I started to think about it, I was like, well, what does that actually mean? And I'm like, well, I don't want to be around him. I don't want to help him. I don't want to make his work easier. I don't necessarily want to see him succeed because he's so annoying. And I realized that I was him, and that likely I was surrounded by people that were annoyed, that didn't want to be overly helpful, didn't necessarily care if I succeeded. I literally had put myself into a situation where it was me against the world, and the world was bigger, and they didn't want to help me get out of the pickle I was in. And still, nobody told me. Nobody said, a stinking word. And so now I had this situation where I had this behavior, this habit, and it was intrinsic at that point. Like it went on without thought that I had seen reflected in somebody else and I could not stand. And I knew I needed to change it. So I didn't know what to do. And I didn't want to tell anybody like, hey, I've just recognized that I have this problem, because I was also concerned that they didn't necessarily see it as a big of a deal as I saw it. Maybe it didn't bother them as much as it was bothering me that people are like this. And I spent a bit of time thinking like, well, what do I do? I have to make a change and I can't ask for help in this situation. So what do I do? So I made a commitment to myself right then and there that I was going to stop cold turkey. I was going to stop detailing out how I spent all of my time. I just was. I wasn't going to tell anybody what time I came in, what time I left, what I did. Wasn't going to do any of those things. And I carried around like paper notebook with me. And every time I went to say something out loud, I wrote it down instead. So anytime I wanted to say, as a counterpoint, well, last Thursday I was here until 10 o'clock, I would just write down, last Thursday I was here until 10 o'clock. I never said it out loud. I still wrote it down to get it out of my system because I knew that if I didn't, I was going to eventually spit it out. But from that moment on, I created a new habit so that I wouldn't actually say the words. And slowly, over time, the temptation to brag about my dedication to the company subsided. And it was all but dead within about a year. And what I realized through this process, because the problem I was trying to solve when I started communicating this was that I needed them to understand what my output was, how much I was dedicated and working for the company. And what I realized when I started observing other people is that they didn't communicate how much effort they were putting out. They were communicating how much value they were providing. So they were still corporate braggers. They were just bragging about different things. They weren't spending time communicating about sacrifices. They were spending time communicating about the value that they added, that the work that they were doing was providing great benefit and amazing results for the company. They were getting selected for these key assignments. They were getting promotions. They were getting all these things because they were communicating why putting them in those places would be in the best interest of the company. My scarcity communication, my communication around how much sacrifice I was giving wasn't making me an asset. It was making me a liability. Everybody saw that as a ticking time bomb. They were waiting to see when I would implode. And so what I started to do was observe my colleagues. What are they bragging about? How are they messaging those pieces of communication? How are they wrapping their sacrifice into benefits for the company? And I began to test it out. And what I found was as soon as I started communicating the value I was adding, I started getting more invitations to participate in things. I started to get more invitations to brainstorm. I started to get more invitations to help build proposals and pitches. I started to get more invitations to audit a project and see how I could help. I started getting invited in for my thought leadership as soon as I stopped talking about how I was a martyr and sacrificing my life for the sake of the company, and instead talked about all of the value, benefits, and results I was driving. I never stopped bragging. I just stopped bragging about my sacrifice. And when you look at all of this through the lens of hustle culture, it's incredibly the same. Because hustle culture, you spend all of that time getting your street cred, so to speak, by bragging about the effort you put out to get a result, how hard you're going to go, how much you're going to put yourself on the line to get that result. And the anti-hustle culture isn't saying don't work hard, but what it is saying is add value. Focus on what you're delivering, not how much time and effort it's taking to get there. And I firmly believe that hustle is a good thing. Working hard, throwing it all out there, having seasons where you're focused on work and that is all you're focused on is going to be important. Always, though, when it's paired with the value and the results that you are delivering. So going back to this college hire that we had who was braggadocious in the most annoying way possible because he was bragging the way that I was, as I was going through this journey and I was really testing it out because I couldn't ask anybody, or at least I thought I couldn't. Hindsight being 2020, I probably should have asked for feedback and it would have helped things. But I just tested it. What if I stopped doing this and I started doing that? Would I see a different result? And the answer was yes. And as I was learning those things, I started to give him some feedback because nobody gave me any feedback. And I said, hey, let's talk about what unique skill sets you have. Let's talk about what you can add to this project. Let's ask, what you can do here. And unfortunately, in that scenario, there was a crash and burn that had to happen in order for there to be a grand realization, which happens. It's happened to all of us. It's happened. But what I learned in that process was that if I wanted to change myself and I saw the importance of us ending dialogues around sacrifice, of us ending the false assumption that working hard, sacrificing everything yields professional success, then I needed to coach, mentor, and celebrate when somebody was doing the opposite. And so as I started to make my way through management and I started to really lead teams, this became a key focus. And I want to explain to you how exactly you can do that too. In order for us to shift this paradigm, whether we are individual contributors or we manage others, it starts with what we celebrate. And what I mean by that is that we need to celebrate results. We need to celebrate added value. We need to celebrate the process and not the effort. Many athletes will tell you that falling in love with the process is how they became great. That it wasn't the number of wins or the number of baskets they made or points scored in a game. It was the action of the repeated process that they were most in love with. They were obsessed with the process. And inside of the corporate world, we don't have the same concept of obsession and getting better and mastery of what we do. However, we can focus more on the achievements that happen as we make our way towards the results. If inside of your teams or with your peers, you're providing positive feedback and encouragement about them following through, about them solving a hard problem, about them working together, about them being brave enough to speak up and say, we're on the wrong path, we need to rethink this. If you're celebrating all of those things, then it means that you're focused on the process. You're focused on the value that the individuals are adding to the organization, to the company, to the mission, to the purpose, day in and day out. And the more that you celebrate the value that they add, the less they are going to be intentionally sacrificing what's important to them. See, these two things are correlated because we as humans do not want to be miserable. Nobody shows up and wants to do a bad job. Nobody shows up in their life and wants to be a bad husband or wife or friend or brother or sister or son or daughter. We all want to be good with all of our relationships, with all of the jobs that we have. We all want to be good at it. And if we can create an environment, if we can shift the paradigm inside of business to celebrate the attempt, to celebrate the incremental gains, to celebrate the value that's added day in and day out, there's less incentive for the humans to sacrifice what's important to them. There's less incentive for the humans to say, I'm going to skip all my kids' sporting events, or I'm not going to go to the doctor for 3 years, or I'm not going to take a vacation for 6 months. Because when we stop incentivizing the hard work, when we stop incentivizing the hustle, and we start celebrating the value that's delivered, everything shifts. Think about going to an all-company meeting. You're invited on stage. And the CEO of the company turns to you and says, I want to thank you for your dedication to our mission. I want to thank you for your intentional caring and customer service with our clients. I want to thank you for showing up in every meeting and offering support, encouragement, and solution-oriented ideas. Here's a bonus for you for contributing to our organization in those ways. How does that feel? You're valued as a human. You're valued for the contributions that you made to the greater good. And on the flip side, if you're brought up in that same meeting and the CEO stands there and says, I want to thank you for working 90 hours a week. I want to thank you for skipping all of your vacations last year. I want to thank you for traveling 3 weeks out of every month. How does that make you feel? They bury you in a place of lack when they incentivize sacrifice. With the first example, they shower you in gratitude and encouragement and light because of the value that you had. Don't you want to work in a company in an environment that's showering you with gratitude, that's celebrating your value versus incentivizing your sacrifice? This is the paradigm shift that we have to make. And so in order to be able to do that, it is really quite simple because it all starts with you. Find somebody today that you can thank for the value that they added, not the sacrifice that they made. Promise yourself that on a weekly basis, you're going to have 5 conversations where you're providing positive feedback about the value somebody has added to your work that week. Make a commitment to yourself that you are going to stop supporting and encouraging sacrifice, and rather you're going to celebrate and champion value and adding capability to the organization. See, it's as simple as every single one of us taking a micro shift where we stop celebrating the sacrifice and we start celebrating the value. It's really just what you're encouraging. And I guarantee you that if you're coming from a place of gratitude, focused on what a person is bringing to the organization, you will encourage them to do more of that. You will encourage them to add more value. By focusing on the value and celebrating the value, you will actually see more productivity. You will see increased results. You will see improved employee engagement, all because you, even as the individual, not the manager, not the executive, are celebrating the process and the benefits and the results that they're bringing forward. If we all just stopped celebrating the sacrifice, we'd see an enormous increase in productivity. In my last organization that I ran, which was quite large and multinational, we celebrated on a monthly basis those individuals that upheld our core values. We highlighted a moment in time where they exemplified it in the last month and gave them public acknowledgement and recognition. And you know what that did? It created momentum. It created momentum and awareness, and the team rallied around living through those core values, which added benefits and engagement and value and results to the organization. We did not celebrate sacrifice. We did not celebrate giving up weekends and nights and saving us from utter destruction. We focused on the good. We were grateful for the value that they brought to the organization, and we were grateful for them living and exemplifying the core values. This can be possible inside of your current organization. You can start a ripple of change. All it takes is for you to shift what you're celebrating. I opened this with the topic of hustle culture and whether it was good or bad. And I've got to say that I love a good hustler, and I think working hard and putting it all out there and going for it is really inspiring. And I believe that this swing, this pendulum shift so that we are anti-hustle culture is a response really to the fact that we're celebrating sacrifice inside of companies and we're not celebrating value. Whether you choose to hustle or not is up to you. Whether you choose to apply a negative connotation to the word hustle or not is up to you. What I invite you to pay attention to is the corporate braggers inside of your business. And what are they bragging about? If they're bragging about the sacrifices that they've made to yield business results, you know that you have an opportunity within that space to change the paradigm. You know that you have an opportunity right now, right here, today, to start encouraging value. You know that if you do it consistently, you'll become a role model for others, and you'll be able to shift behavior incrementally over time. Just as I realized when I saw a corporate bragger in front of me that celebrating and communicating sacrifice was not serving me, you can teach others the same. I say, let's stop talking about whether we are pro or against hustle. Hustle has nothing to do with it. Instead, let's focus on what we are encouraging. Let's focus on what we're rewarding, and let's change our incentives so that they're wrapped around value, positive contribution. We celebrate and rejoice in the process to get to the results. And when we all start working together with a mindset of abundance, we will see increased productivity, we will see increased efficiency, we will see increased sales, and we will all be happier working together. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about the corporate bragger and what we can learn from them, to hustle or not to hustle, and what we should incentivize inside of our businesses. If you found any value at all in this today, or if you learned something or identified something that you want to change, please share this podcast on whichever social feed you use and comment with why somebody else should listen to this. I appreciate your time so much today. I'm looking forward to our conversation next week. And until then, friends, please know that you are wise, you are strong, you are capable, and I believe in you.